Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good evening. You're watching the news from the Sultanate of Oman television. First, the headlines. Daesh fighters capture a security compound near the center of town of Kobani as US-led coalition intensifies strikes to prevent its falling. Israeli occupation forces impose restrictions on worshippers trying to enter Al-Aqsa Mosque. And two human rights activists in child welfare and girls' education fields win equally the Nobel Peace Prize for 2014. Those were the headlines. Now for the news in detail. A UN envoy called on Turkey today to help prevent a slaughter in the Syrian border town of Kobani at the hands of Daesh state fighters, saying he feared a repeat of the 1995 Srebrenica massacre when thousands died. Staffan de Mistura, the United Nations envoy to Syria, appealed to Ankara to let volunteers across the frontier so that they can reinforce Kurdish militias defending the town that lies between sides of Turkish territory. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says Daesh fighters have captured a security compound near the center of the besieged Kurdish town of Kobani. The compound includes security buildings, the headquarters of the local Kurdish administration, and Kobani's prison. The effectiveness of the US-led coalition effort in Syria is under scrutiny as Daesh fighters tried to overrun a strategic Syrian town on Turkey's border. The United States and its allies, including Gulf states, have conducted more than 138 strikes in Syria against the militants since September 22nd. Meanwhile, the US military conducted 9 airstrikes against Daesh militants in Syria during the past 2 days, including 7 strikes near the border town of Kobani, US Central Command said today. The 2 strikes destroyed 2 training facilities and 4 others hit south of the town near Syria's border with Turkey, striking vehicles, a tank and 2 small units of Daesh fighters. The strikes also hit other cities in Syria, Deir az-Zur and Al-Hasaka, while another strike in Iraq hit near Baghdad. Egyptian security forces killed 7 militants believed to be with the Sinai-based Ansar Beit al-Maqdis group. Police intelligence indicated that militants were taking shelter in a mountain in Suez, a base from which they plotted and launched attacks against security forces. After heavy shootout with the armed extremists, security forces terminated all 7 members and later identified them via DNA test. In response, the Egyptian forces have been carrying out a massive offensive in northern Sinai that has so far resulted in the killing and capturing of hundreds of extremists. Israeli police clashed with Palestinian youths in and around Al-Aqsa compound, driving protesters into Al-Aqsa Mosque, from which they continued to throw stones and Molotov cocktails. Shortly after the clashes, the worshippers were evacuated from the site and Israeli police were seen patrolling the Al-Aqsa Plaza. The Palestinians said officers attacked some worshippers and at least 1 man was wounded. They added that tear gas was used to drive away Palestinians who gathered outside the mosque. Dozens of angry Palestinians who were prevented from entering the mosque then staged protests in front of Israeli forces who blocked the road leading to the compound. Israeli police spokesperson said police stepped up presence in and around Jerusalem ahead of the Jewish festival of Sukkot, in which worshippers make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. At least 1 person was killed and 3 wounded when an artillery shell hit a shopping center in Donetsk, a city in East Ukraine controlled by pro-Russian separatists, where fighting goes on despite a ceasefire. Meanwhile, the sounds of artillery shells and gunfire rang out over the skyline in Donetsk, a city in East Ukraine controlled by pro-Russian separatists, where fighting is marring a ceasefire agreement that has become frayed. Buildings near an airport in the region have come under heavy fire in recent days as Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatists battle for control of the site. While fighting in much of eastern Ukraine has been calmed by a month-old truce, it has raged and unabated at Donetsk airport and neighboring areas. World economic leaders are being urged to rally around a plan to let government do what it does best, spend money in an effort to buoy a global economy that remains slack and slowing. The effort comes as 6 years of crisis fighting have lapsed with little guarantee the global economy is on a stable footing. International Monetary Fund Managing Director Christine Lagarde made a blunt call for the US and Germany in particular to open the taps and spend more on infrastructure projects, a stark reversal from the fund's recent fixation on government debt and structural reform that has proved politically difficult to implement.
But I think that on this occasion, each institution has to do everything it can in its own area of competence and, more importantly, coordinate and cooperate with the others. And we are ready to do more. It's very rare for the IMF to say that, but on this occasion I will say it. It is good to increase the fiscal deficit when it's a matter of curing the people, of taking the precautions to actually try to contain the disease. The IMF doesn't say that very often. It's good to increase the fiscal deficit. So from our perspective, and I want to repeat that in front of you three presidents, we will stand ready to help you more, and I hope that the board will support our efforts in so doing.
Stay tuned because still to come in our news bulletin. Malala Yousafzai is the youngest person to be awarded the globally prestigious annual Nobel Peace Prize. Welcome back to the news from the Sultanate of Oman television. Activities of the first Zahira Camel Beautification Festival were launched in the village of Yankul in the Governorate of Zahira. The participation started by preparing the camels in special places locally known as Al-Izbar that are specialized for such festivals and competitions. The festival included 18 rounds and witnessed a huge attendance from camel breeders as well as those interested in such events from both governorates of Zahira and Brahmi. The camels winning first places are chosen by a special committee. It was also an opportunity for merchants to showcase camel beautification items. Weaving is a well-known traditional craft in various wilayas of the Sultanate, among which was the wilayah of Kuryat in the Governorate of Muscat. The weavers make various types of Omani clothes, namely turban and izar. This craft is considered a cultural and social feature of the Omani civilization. However, the workers in this field express that it is on its way to oblivion because of the industrialization of this trade. Three people in Mali were injected with an experimental Ebola vaccine, the first such trial on African soil. The volunteers were among 40 Malian health workers who agreed to participate in an international trial of the CAD3 EBOZ vaccine, which was developed by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases in the eastern U.S. state of Maryland. The trial vaccine was previously tested on chimpanzees and was found to stimulate an immune response in the apes against the Ebola virus. virus. Meanwhile, 7 people turned themselves into an Ebola isolation unit in Madrid, where Teresa Romero, the nurse who became the first person to contract Ebola outside Africa, lay gravely ill. Alarms about Ebola spread around Europe grew today as Macedonia said it was checking for the virus in a British man who died within hours of being admitted to hospital in the capital Skopje yesterday. A Prague hospital was testing a 56-year-old Czech man with symptoms of the virus. Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani schoolgirl campaigner who survived the Taliban murder attempt in 2012, became the youngest person to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. More details in the following report.
2 years ago, Malala Yousafzai's young life almost came to an end. On the 9th of October 2012, the young Pakistani schoolgirl was shot in the head and neck by the Taliban while returning home from school. Miraculously, she survived. After initial treatment in Pakistan, she was flown to England, where she underwent weeks of surgery and rehabilitation.
Birmingham is very special for me because it was here that I found myself alive 7 days after I was shot. It is now my second home after my beloved Pakistan.
Malala grew up in the Swat Valley in northwest Pakistan. At the end of the last decade, the Taliban were in control. Television and music were banned and schools were regularly blown up. In 2009, when she was 11 years old, she anonymously wrote a blog denouncing the violent extremists and calling for girls to have access to education. Her reputation grew both at home and abroad, but resulted in threats from the Taliban. Now, returned to health and living in England, her passion for education is undimmed.
I want to learn about politics, about social rights, and about the law. I want to learn how to bring change in this world, and how should I work for the happiness and for the education of the girls.
Malala has become a symbol of the fight against religious bigotry, and her activism has already won her numerous accolades. After a military campaign to eradicate the Taliban, more and more girls are going to school. Those responsible for the attack were arrested last month, according to the Pakistani army. Having only recently turned 17, Malala Yousafzai has already published her autobiography and one day hopes to return to Pakistan to continue her battle for change.
The port city of Genoa on Italy's northeastern coast was hit by flash floods overnight, which killed 1 person. The body of the 57-year-old victim was found in a tunnel shortly after midnight. 3 streams running through the city broke their banks, and waters rose as high as 1.8 meters, dragging away parked cars and street signs. Part of the city were left with no electricity. Schools were closed today, and residents were urged to avoid using their cars. Authorities said no weather alert was issued because mathematical models used by weather forecasters failed to predict the storm. Genoa, a city of almost 600,000 people, was hit by another major flood in 2011, which killed 6 people. Now for the general weather forecast. Clear skies will prevail over the Sultanate with chances of scattered rain over the Hajar Mountains and nearby areas. The coastal areas of the Governorates of Dhofar will have partly cloudy skies with chances of scattered rain. Winds will be northeasterly light to moderate along the coastal areas of Sea of Oman, while it will be southerly to southeasterly light to moderate over the rest of the Sultanate. Seas along slight to moderate with a maximum wave height of 1.5 meters. This is the Sultanate of Oman television. Before we end tonight's bulletin, here are the main points once again. Daesh fighters capture a security compound near the center of town of Kobani as the US-led coalition intensifies strikes to prevent its falling. Israeli occupation forces impose restrictions on worshippers trying to enter Al-Aqsa Mosque. And two human rights activists in child welfare and girls' education fields win equally the Nobel Prize for 2014. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news bulletin. From all of us here at the newsroom and the studio, thank you for watching and good night.